Ernest King. Three words that made every American admiral flinch in December 1941. December 20th, 1400 hours. The White House, Washington. Secretary of the Navy Frank Knox sits across from President Franklin Delano Roosevelt in the Oval Office. The smell of cigarette smoke lingers in the air, and the old wood creaks under every step. Maps of the Pacific are spread across the desk, red pins marking the disaster that began 13 days ago. Pearl Harbor, Wake Island falling, Guam lost, the Philippines under siege. The most powerful navy in American history is reeling. And the man who was supposed to run it, Admiral Harold Stark, has failed completely. Everyone knows it.
Knox names a candidate. The obvious choice is clear. The Navy needs a leader who can restore alliances with the British, coordinate operations, reassure a terrified public, and work closely with General George Marshall. The ideal candidate, Admiral Chester Nimitz. Calm, diplomatic, brilliant. Nimitz looks like a retired banker, but fights like a chess grandmaster. But Roosevelt chooses not Nimitz. He chooses Ernest Joseph King, 63 years old, a man known throughout the fleet as hot-tempered, uncontrollable, and confrontational. His daughter would later describe him as the most even-tempered man in the Navy because he was always in a rage. Commander Hugh Rodman once tried to have him dismissed for insubordination. His reputation is toxic. He drinks too much. He fights with everyone. He once returned an urgent wartime letter from General Hap Arnold, unopened, simply because it was addressed to Rear Admiral King instead of Admiral King. Yet Roosevelt signs Executive Order 8984. Ernest Joseph King becomes Commander-in-Chief of the United States Fleet, wielding powers no American naval officer has ever held. What no one realizes yet is that this decision will become the single most consequential personnel choice of the entire war. If these kinds of decisions in history surprise you, hit the like button and subscribe to explore more high-stakes military choices. Comment below, who would you have chosen instead of King? King takes command at a critical moment, January 1942. German U-boats under Admiral Karl Dönitz launch Operation Drumbeat, turning the U.S. East Coast into a deadly shooting gallery. In the first 6 months of 1942, approximately 397 ships totaling over 2 million tons are sunk, killing roughly 5,000 people. Cities like New York, Miami, and Atlantic City shine with coastal lights, silhouetting merchant vessels like targets on a plate. The British demand convoys. King resists. His argument: poorly escorted convoys are worse than none. His destroyers are needed to protect troop transports heading to Europe. Not a single troop transport is lost in 1942. The first organized coastal convoy does not sail until May 14th, 1942, 5 months after the slaughter begins. Results are immediate. In the following 3 months, 1,400 convoyed ships lose only 3. Simultaneously, King begins constructing the strategic framework that will destroy the Japanese Empire. His temper and confrontational nature create a negotiation dynamic. Roosevelt appears reasonable while King fights fiercely for American interests. On his 64th birthday, King formally notifies Roosevelt that he has reached mandatory retirement age. Roosevelt handwrites on the same letter, "So what, old top? I may even send you a birthday present," and mails it back. This combination of fury and brilliance will make King the most powerful naval commander in history. Key decisions, including Guadalcanal, prove that sometimes the most indispensable leader is the one everyone hates. Ernest King Naval Strategy World War II defined the United States Navy during its most desperate hours. By January 1942, the Atlantic coast was under relentless assault. German U-boats under Admiral Karl Dönitz unleashed Operation Drumbeat. Merchant ships disappeared like shadows. In the first 6 months, approximately 397 ships were sunk, totaling over 2 million tons. Roughly 5,000 lives were lost. Cities like New York, Miami, and Atlantic City watched the nightmare unfold as submarines surfaced at night, silhouetted by coastal lights. Civilians saw merchant vessels like shooting gallery targets, helpless against a silent, unseen predator beneath the waves. King's first reaction was resolute, controversial, and deeply pragmatic. He resisted immediate British calls for coastal convoys. His reasoning was precise. Poorly escorted convoys were more vulnerable than no convoys at all. He argued that the Navy only had 20 vessels and 103 aircraft to defend 1,500 miles of coastline. King redirected destroyers to protect troop transports. Not a single troop transport was lost in 1942. By May 14, 1942, the first fully organized coastal convoy sailed. In the following 3 months, 1,400 merchant ships were escorted safely, with only 3 lost. Samuel Eliot Morison, official naval historian, later wrote that the U.S. Navy had been woefully unprepared, and much of the blame rested internally. King's genius was not limited to crisis management. He was simultaneously designing a Pacific strategy that would cripple Japan. In March 1942, Roosevelt merged the positions of Commander-in-Chief United States Fleet and Chief of Naval Operations into a single office. Executive Order 9096 granted King both operational and administrative authority. He could deploy every fighting ship, every naval asset, without bureaucratic obstruction. Authority over the Navy Department's complex feudal structures gave him unprecedented reach. King became the most powerful naval officer in U.S. history, wielding authority that spanned oceans, fleets, and strategy. By summer 1942, King had approved a bold, controversial offensive, Guadalcanal. The plan bypassed Army objections and even concerns within his own Navy leadership. "My ships, my Marines, my operation," King declared. Field Marshal Sir Alan Brooke later wrote in his diary that King's vision was largely Pacific-focused, uncompromising, and relentless. The operation began on August 7, 1942. Over 6 months, Japan lost 24 major warships, approximately 800 aircraft, and over 30,000 personnel killed. Without King, historians argue, Guadalcanal would never have occurred, and Japan might have retained the strategic initiative in the Pacific. At the same time, King's submarine campaign systematically strangled Japanese logistics. By 1945, U.S. submarines sank over 1,100 merchant ships, totaling nearly 4,800,000 tons, plus 201 warships, including a battleship, 8 carriers, and 11 cruisers. These operations accounted for 56% of Japan's total merchant marine losses. Remarkably, the submarine force never exceeded 50,000 personnel, just 1.6% of the Navy, yet suffered a 22% casualty rate, the highest among all American branches. Halfway through this block, it's worth asking, if you were in Roosevelt's position, would you have trusted a notoriously abrasive, confrontational officer like King with the fate of 2 oceans? Comment below. Would his aggressive personality have been worth the calculated risk? King's clashes with allies and generals were equally legendary. At the Great Allied Conferences of 1943 and 1944, King fought ferociously with British commanders over Pacific resources. He sparred constantly with Douglas MacArthur over campaign priorities, insisting on operational efficiency over political symbolism. Roosevelt leveraged King's aggression as a strategic tool. By appointing someone unyielding, he could negotiate while appearing reasonable himself. King's combativeness was authentic, not theatrical. By November 1943, King had forced a strategic dual-axis campaign in the Pacific. Nimitz drove through the Central Pacific, capturing the Gilberts in November 1943, the Marshalls in January 1944, and the Marianas by June 1944. MacArthur advanced through the Southwest Pacific in parallel. The dual drive produced the decisive Battle of the Philippine Sea, annihilating Japanese carrier aviation, and Leyte Gulf, the largest naval battle in history. Every victory reinforced King's vision, relentless, aggressive, unflinching. In essence, Ernest King naval strategy World War II was a combination of foresight, ruthlessness, and operational audacity. The man who had seemed impossible to control in peacetime became the driving force behind America's naval dominance. Without him, the Pacific theater might have looked dramatically different. Yet even as ships burned and skies filled with aircraft, King's temperament remained legendary, confrontational, unapologetic, and utterly committed to the mission. Ernest King Final Legacy World War II was written not in memos, but across oceans. By August 14th, 1945, the war was over. King sent his last wartime message to Admiral Nimitz. "Suspend all offensive action. Remain alert." Then he turned to an aide and said, "Well, it is all over. I wonder what I'm going to do tomorrow." The United States Navy had grown from 337,000 personnel and roughly 350 major combatant ships in December 1941 to over 3,300,000 personnel and 6,768 ships by August 1945. The fleet now included 28 fleet carriers, 71 escort carriers, 23 battleships, and 232 submarines. Over 70% of the world's naval tonnage was under American command. None of these carriers existed when King took command. Ernest King Final Legacy World War II is inseparable from Guadalcanal, the dual-axis Pacific strategy, and the submarine campaign that destroyed Japan's merchant fleet. From August 7th, 1942, to the end of the war, every decision he made shaped the Pacific theater. Japan's merchant fleet collapsed from 6,400,000 tons in December 1941 to less than 1,500,000 tons by August 1945. American submarines accounted for over 56% of these losses. The combination of naval and aerial operations ensured Japan could never concentrate its remaining forces. King's insistence on aggressive, relentless campaigns turned the tide of the war while defying bureaucratic conventions and angering allies. The human element of King's legacy is just as striking. He fought everyone: MacArthur, the British, even fellow naval officers, and yet produced results no one else could. King's personal style, confrontational and uncompromising, allowed Roosevelt to negotiate from strength. The president recognized that King's fury was strategic, not personal theatrics. His combative personality became a tool that extended American influence in conferences from Casablanca to Trident, forcing allies to allocate resources that matched King's vision for the Pacific. King Final Legacy, WWII, also included his mentorship and empowerment of subordinate commanders. Nimitz, Spruance, and Halsey executed campaigns with precise coordination, while King maintained overarching control from Washington. His operational design ensured that every fleet movement, every amphibious landing, and every submarine patrol contributed to a cohesive strategy. By the end of 1945, the United States Navy was a global force unmatched in history, capable of projecting power across two oceans simultaneously. Even in death, Ernest King Final Legacy World War II remained controversial and remarkable. He died on June 25, 1956, at the Naval Hospital in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. He was 77 years old. King was buried at the United States Naval Academy Cemetery in Annapolis, Maryland. The Navy named a destroyer leader after him, DLG-10, later redesignated as a cruiser. Secretary of the Navy James Forrestal remarked that King had the brains, all right, but he hated his guts. King replied with characteristic bluntness that he hated Forrestal's guts too. Even in death, the man could not stop fighting. The final measure of King's influence is strategic. Pearl Harbor may have shattered the U.S. Navy, but by 1945, the Pacific was an American highway. Roosevelt never explained his choice in a single document. He did not need to. The oceans themselves were proof. King had transformed a stunned, demoralized force into the most powerful naval machine in human history. Every Japanese stronghold, every fleet, and every convoy disruption bore his imprint. As historians continue to debate his methods, one fact remains indisputable. Ernest King Final Legacy World War II is a story of unparalleled military command, ruthless determination, and audacious strategy. He was the man who turned fury into victory, chaos into order, and ambition into operational mastery. His decisions saved millions of lives, won the war in the Pacific, and ensured that the United States emerged as a global naval power, unlike any in history. If you want to explore the next untold story of how American leadership shaped World War II, watch our video on Admiral Nimitz's daring Central Pacific campaigns and discover how his coordination with King sealed Japan's fate.